Jerry Cast.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the music. It turns out that computers are not loved in their own country either. It's weird. It works everywhere else in the world, but it just doesn't work here. Okay. The title is Best Before. And the subtitle is Rather Than After. I remember when I was in grade 9, I think it was, my oldest brother was a missionary in Zambia. And he wrote me what do they call those? Those aerograms. You remember those funny things you fold up the thin paper and you could write it, not air, is that what it was? What do they call those things? Is that an aerogram? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I got this aerogram from him, which I thought was, pretty cool. He actually remembered me. And one of the things he explained was that in that part of the world, there were 3 times at which you could apply bars to your windows. There was the best time, which is before everything was stolen. There was the better time, which was after everything was stolen. And then there was the good time, which was any time after that. And he commented that they had managed to install the bars at the better time. It's best before. It's best before. Well, I'm going to steal a line from Joe Cruz and Doug Batchelor. There's an amazing fact. And I think I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it one more time because it's been huge in my life. When I was in academy, every spring they had track and field day. And because we were such dedicated track and field enthusiasts, we all started to train for our respective events, 3, maybe 4 days before the event. And I quickly sized up the available options and decided that the last thing I wanted to do was a 5-mile run. That wasn't my style. And but I knew I wasn't fast enough for like a 50-yard or 100-yard dash. So I settled on the 220-yard dash. It'd be roughly a 200-meter dash. And so, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 days before the occasion, during the evening free time period, we were out there on the track, area, whatever, with the PE coach. And he was getting ready to run just a kind of a practice 220-yard dash. And so then he explained to us. He says, "Now listen, these guys, I got to tell you this works. It's called a 220-yard dash. But the truth is, none of you can sprint for 220 yards. You don't have it. Sorry, you don't. So the real art of the thing here is knowing when to really start kicking. Because if you start kicking too soon, you're going to run out of gas. And then you look stupid when you come to the finish line." So with that encouraging bit of advice, he lined us all up, shot his little starter's pistol. I think he enjoyed that more than anything else, actually. And we all took off, like as if we were running a marathon. And we all kept looking at the other guys. And we're all just jogging around the track, looking at all the other guys. And finally, it dawned on us that we were almost done with the world's slowest 220. And I don't know if that was traumatic or just impressive. But that one little event changed my life. Because I learned an amazing fact. If you do what everyone else does, any guesses? You'll end up like everyone else. And there are large swaths of time and life circumstances where, frankly, I don't want to end up like everyone else. I just don't. And it's been good. Because just a few months after that experience, I was faced with probably the most consequential decision of my life. And I did what nobody else did because I didn't want to end up where everybody else ended up. And I've been happy for it ever since. We won't go into that story, but nonetheless, it's true. Well, okay. The Bible actually has a lot of examples of this kind of thing. Yeah, so how much difference could it make, right? Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded Noah, and the Lord shut him in. How much difference did it make whether you're on the inside or the outside of that door? Yeah, it's not a big thing. It's like, the door couldn't have been more than a couple feet thick at the most. That's a pretty thick door. You could be 3 feet apart or 1 meter. And it would make a world of difference. I've always wondered about that situation right there, because those were real people. And there was, to me, the most intriguing ones of the 8 that went on that ark are the daughters-in-law. They had families. They had parents. Could have been a bit of a tough deal. I don't know how enthusiastic they were. Maybe it's like, well, I'm sort of stuck with the guy, so I guess I have to go where he goes. Maybe that was their excuse. Whatever, they got on the boat. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And I always think of Mrs. Shem and Mrs. Japheth and Mrs. Ham when I think of that verse. Well, there's another. Here's one that was quick. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Wow. Good day to be out of town. Makes a difference. And Lot barely made it. It's another interesting case, because this one's not even Jews, Hebrews, nothing. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Arise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as has not been in Egypt since its founding until now. Therefore, send now and gather your livestock." He's talking to the Egyptians. "And all that you have in the field, for the hail shall come down on every man and every animal which is found in the field and is not brought home, and they shall die." Well, predictably enough, he who feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his livestock flee to the houses. But he who did not regard the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field. What do you suppose happened? Sometimes circumstances play for keeps. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. But the simple pass on and are punished. Apparently, that's sort of an important idea, because the Bible repeats it, almost word for word, right? What is it? 5 chapters later. I don't know. Maybe there's some plagiarism going on here or something. But anyhow, somebody thought it was important enough to put it in a second time. There is something to be said for looking ahead just a bit. Now, there's not a lot to be said for the human ability to predict the future. We're not really good at that. But there's something to be said for at least some basic thought going into that sort of a thing, Well, the Bible has some good advice for us. I think particularly pertinent to our circumstances. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not disturbed. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. But all these things are the beginning of sorrows. This is such an intriguing chapter as a whole. There was a day, or a year, or there was a time, an era, perhaps, when in the Adventist church we had a special name for this chapter. Does anybody know what the name for this chapter was? You could have said 3 words, and every Adventist in a pew would have known what you were talking about. Signs of the Times, that's pretty close. It's 4 words. Pretty good, though. No, it was called The Great Chapter. The Great Chapter. Because it was so integral to much of our preaching in those years. So here's the Great Chapter. And it's such an interesting one. Because it talks about concerns, wars, rumors of wars. But it says, don't panic. Don't panic. It's not the end yet. And, we've got a fair chunk of history we can look back on since this was said. There's quite a few examples of nation rising up against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and famines and pestilences. It's easy to look at that and say, yeah, it's kind of like it's always been. It was intriguing to me, a minor point here, but the Bible has a number of examples like this, right? I will set Egyptians against Egyptians. Everyone will fight against his brother, everyone against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. The spirit of Egypt will fail in its midst. I will destroy their counsel, and they will consult idols and charmers, the mediums and the sorcerers. That was interesting to me. So it's not uncommon in biblical history to see this sort of a thing where nation rises against nation, right? In this verse, it's Egyptian against Egyptian. And it was intriguing to me that when things get messy enough, they turn to the idols and the charmers, the mediums and the sorcerers. Because when push comes to shove, people want to know the future. They don't know what to do next. They want to know. Because when it comes down to this level of things, they know that it could be their life that's on the line. And sometimes they do some very unwise things in trying to gain some information. Well, there's another example of this sort of thing. And in those times there was no peace to the one who went out, nor to the one who came in, but great turmoil was on all the inhabitants of the land. So nation was destroyed by nation and city by city, for God troubled them with every adversity. But you, be strong, and do not let your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded. That's nice. I take some degree of comfort in the Lord's words of encouragement in the middle of words of distress and warning type of thing, you know? It's nice to think that God's people can be secure. Yeah? We can be strong. We can not let our hands be weak. I like that. Well, back to the idea. Now this is this is the second great chapter, right? If Matthew 24 is the great chapter, the next one, you know, related is, of course, Luke 21, right? When you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified. For these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes in various places and famines and pestilences, and there will be fearful sights, and great signs from heaven. Okay, interesting. Just a few verses later, same chapter. In Luke there it says, but take heed to yourselves. Let not your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. Back in Matthew, it says, now he who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. And I was intrigued by the kind of common thought between those two phrases, right? Take heed, lest your heart be weighed down with the cares of this life. The cares of this world. This has been the biggest perplexity of people I've talked to for like the last 2 decades. How do I relate to this? What's it mean for me? Jesus said this. He says, therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life. I think that's the same as cares of this life. I think it is. What you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? For after all these things the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Maybe you're smarter than I am. That's a good chance of that, actually. But I find it hard to know exactly where to draw a line on that. You know? Does that mean that I spend 0 time getting an education? Does that mean I spend 0 time working to pay my bills? Yeah? Is that what that means? I don't think so. But how far should you go in that direction? You got to go a little ways. You know? If you do the same thing everybody else is doing, you end up in the same place where everybody else ends up. And I don't want to end up there. Because at the end of the book, it's just not good. So I find this, I've always found this fascinating, perplexing, sometimes aggravating. Then there's this little piece of advice. Mrs. Lot almost made it out of Sodom, but her heart was still there. Now, there's only one example of that. So it's not a matter of doing what everybody else is doing, although I think there might be some similarity between turning around and looking back and just staying in town in the first place. What's the balance? What's the balance? This passage, Alexi read it for our scripture reading. This passage has intrigued me quite a lot of late. The kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now, 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. I think that's kind of a parallel to the prudent man and the fool who goes on without looking ahead, right? Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But when the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight, a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him." Okay. Then all his virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "No, go to Walmart." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, I don't know you." I kind of like this parable, even though I don't quite take it seriously. The thing I like about it is like 50% got in. That's a pretty high percentage from all the other pictures that I've seen, okay? I like that. There's a place to be optimistic. There's a place to be hopeful. Now, the thing that's interesting is that this parable depicts a role that God's church is supposed to fill. And that is the warning, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him." That is a part of the last message to the world. And it's kind of problematic because we make jokes out of that sort of thing. How do you walk into Vernon or Kelowna or Vancouver and say, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him," and not be turned into a joke? I've wondered that. Because we make jokes out of guys like that. But there's something really interesting. I'm going to claim it as providential. I don't know. I like it. Whoever this guy was, I don't remember his name now, but the artist that drew this cartoon, if I remember right, this was, I think it was like 2016 or something like that. 3 years later, he drew another one, sort of similar. Do you catch the difference? When you got headlines like that, it doesn't seem like quite such a joke. The the minds of the population take a different turn. And I've thought, just in my own thinking, how are we going to do this? How do we take this message? Behold the bride. This is an urgent message. Okay? Now, in our denominational history, we did this once. That's why I had a caption or the headline a while ago, once before and once again, or something like that, right? We did this once. And we know when we did this? It's been a few years. 1844. And 1844, long story, won't go into all the details. Most of you know it. But the urgency was driven by a time prophecy. That's why it seemed urgent. Now, there have been some corrections and things like that, whatever, okay. But that's why it seemed urgent. And we're never going to have a time prophecy like that again. So where do you find any urgency so that you don't look like a joke? Nobody wants God's message to look like a joke. Noah probably had to put up with a lot of that. I'm sure he didn't care for it. And because it looked like such a joke, nobody got on board except for his family, right? So there's that to it. So how does it not look like a joke? And so I've thought, it's got to be circumstances. Something happens in the world that makes people go, let me think about this. Just enough to open their minds. So I did a little checking, because I'm a curious sort of a guy. I'm not sure if these show up really well. Yeah, okay, the lines, you can see the lines. May not be able to read the text. This is the number of recorded natural disasters, 1965 to 2023. So almost 60 years. And we've got, the top line is all disasters, and then it's floods and extreme weather, and then earthquake, drought, wildfire, and extreme temperature. It's kind of intriguing to me that extreme temperature is like down at the very bottom, despite what you might hear on some media outlets. But whatever. But you can just look at the lines, and they definitely look like they're going up, right? Over the last 60 years. But the guys who record all this stuff, got to give them some credit. They're the experts. They probably know something about what they're doing. And they will tell you, right here, note that this largely reflects increases in data reporting and should not be used to assess the total number of events. So I did a little reading on their website and looking around and things. And basically what they said is that, they've got data going back to 1904. But it's all right down the bottom line, basically. And basically what they said is that it wasn't until about 1975 that they started getting a system in place to actually record all this data and, that kind of thing. And it took almost 25 years to get it up to roughly the level of efficiency that it is now. And so they say, if you want to do head-to-head comparison, you can really only look at about the last 20 years or so. And so when we do that, there's some ups and downs, but it looks a lot different. Flood is still the first single item. Extreme weather, everything's pretty much holds its own place. Volcanic activities down there on the bottom. And so I looked at that and said, well, really? I'll just be honest. It seems to me, subjectively, it seems to me like there's more disasters than there used to be. It seems like it. But you know what? These are the guys with the data, so whatever. So then I thought, maybe it's not just the number of disasters. Maybe it's the impact of the disasters. So I did a little more hunting around. Global deaths from disasters over more than a century. Well, where's the year here? So this is about the 1920s. 1.26 million deaths from a famine, 3 million deaths from a drought, 3.7 million deaths from floods, and then another 2 million a few years later, whatever. This is the red is the composite of all this. But it's kind of interesting. You get out here. You remember the Boxing Day tsunami, 2004? That's here. And I hate to say it, but I honestly don't remember it, but there must have been a pretty big earthquake in Haiti in 2010. I don't have any clear memory of it. But there's a lot of people not dying from disasters. It doesn't look like we've got big numbers in the last few years, and that left me puzzled again. And then I thought of one more thing to look at. And maybe this is the answer. Economic damage. When you hit them in the pocketbook, it really hurts. And I think there's a pretty clear rise in a lot of things going on there. So maybe it's the money. Maybe that's what counts, right? Maybe it's the money that drives the news coverage. Maybe it's not the disasters themselves so much as the way they get packaged and presented to us, possibly. After all, if you're a news company, you got to sell news, right? I mean, that's your product. You deliver news. You got to find a way to make the news something people will pay for eventually, right? Maybe it's not just natural disasters, because I honestly believe that the general population is pretty keyed up on this kind of stuff. There's a lot of tension out there on this. So I thought, well, what else could it be if it's not natural disasters? Well, it's the unnatural ones. Go through this quickly here. Next, I think it's 6 or 7 slides, something like that. These are some headlines I just grabbed from a convenient news site that had an archive. So I went back 3 weeks. This is 3 weeks worth of headlines. Not all of them, just the ones that looked interesting. Drone sightings force Copenhagen and Oslo airports to close. Attack. Russian? Drones over Denmark. Hybrid attack. World War III tensions. Poland shoots down Russian drones. First time NATO has fired. Europe on brink of war. Major escalation. Putin has crossed the line. Zelensky urges up joint air defense. Updates. U.S. Poland vow to confront Russian fighter jets. Germany prepares to treat 1,000 soldiers a day. Would be wounded soldiers they're talking about there. In major shift, Trump now thinks Ukraine can win back all of its territory taken by Russia. Ruthlessly mocks paper tiger Moscow. Dumps Putin. Relationship didn't mean anything. Goes scorched earth at UN. This is exciting stuff. That seems to be an extra slide somehow. Hegseth. For those of you who don't have any compulsion to follow what's going on down south of us, this Hegseth guy used to be, until about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, the head of the Department of Defense. He's still a head, but they've renamed it. The U.S. does not have a Department of Defense anymore. In a very subtle sort of a thing, they changed the name to the Department of War. Subtle. Hegseth, the guy in charge of that department, orders unprecedented meeting, 800 generals, admirals, all together in one place. Seems like that's a pretty good way to ask for a bomb, but anyhow, whatever. Yeah. Sows alarm. Navy does a 7,500-mile thermonuclear weapon test. It was a dud. I mean, the test worked fine, but they didn't actually blow up a atom bomb or anything. The U.S. fleet patrolling the Caribbean. Okay. Venezuelan jets fly over U.S. Navy ship and show of force. Caribbean war grows fear. Caribbean war? What's this all about? Where's this come from? I don't know. I completely missed that one. Trump deploying F-35s to Puerto Rico. Fox News. Looks like U.S. military going to war. Maybe. U.S. preps military strikes in Venezuela. Okay. For whatever that's worth. Maybe that's what's got people stressed out. In the face of all that, I'm going to give you only one piece of advice that could even be possibly stretched into the regular prepper category. You might want to consider this one. It's possibly worth knowing. I'm not even going to explain it to you. Just remember potassium iodide. You can Google it yourself. If some idiot starts blasting off nuclear weapons, you might want to have some potassium iodide. And I'll just give you a hot tip. That's not the time to try to order it from Amazon. It's best before. Pretty sure on that one. You might want to consider a few other areas. What does it mean to be the prudent guy who looks ahead? What does that mean right now? You might want to think about learn how to grow a garden. Is that too radical? It's kind of a weird step because you could plant a little garden, and if the crops came in before you died, they could keep you alive for 3 weeks. Little gardens don't do that much good. It's just kind of a weird thing. If you're actually talking about staying alive, it's like somewhere you're going to have to grow some real food. I don't know. Maybe prudence at this point is just taking some extra steps to get out of debt. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe prudence is just trying to figure out how you're going to relate to all your neighbors when they suddenly find out that their prescription drugs are totally unavailable. There's more things than heroin that have withdrawal effects. I think it was 55% of adult Canadians are, adult, not adult, but over, I think it was over, was it 55% over 55 years old? I forget what it was, but there's a surprisingly large percentage of the Canadian population that are on prescription drugs. And if there's a supply chain disruption, they won't have them. So that's an interesting thing. What does that mean to look ahead? I don't know. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman. And they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. And that's really all I want to leave you with. Is that I think it's a time to consider doing something other than what everybody else is doing. That's what I think. You have the privilege of forming your own opinion. And I won't be offended if you differ from me. But there's a pretty basic distinction. And the Bible repeats it twice. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. I'd like to be prudent. But the devil's got 15 counterfeit forms of prudence too. Just telling you, there are people who think they're prudent when they, buy a bunch of ammunition for their AK-47. In their mind, that's prudent. I'm thinking that one is not the right track. That's just me. What does it mean to be prudent? I think this is something we should be praying about. Because one day, what a weird thought. After so many years of everything going as it has from the beginning, one day, possibly soon, everything's going to change. It's going to change quickly. And I don't want to be jogging around the track with all my buddies. So that's my encouragement. Give it some thought. Give it some prayer. We have a closing hymn. And I went pretty long, so I'm going to suggest that we sing first and last. Our song leader types can come up, musician types can come up, yeah. We Are Living, We Are Dwelling, hymn number 617.
If you'll stand and sing with us.
Thank you. Let's bow our heads. Father, your mercies are ever sure and ever faithful. And among those mercies, we ask that you would grant us prudence. In Jesus' name, Amen.